Recent developments in Russia's war on Ukraine have illustrated what can happen when a rushed mobilization into a dangerous combat zone is combined with poor training. Putin's partial mobilization is now allegedly complete, but massive problems are already surfacing. Today we'll look at the importance of military training and the disastrous repercussions that can arise for a country like Russia when militaries fail to take training their new troops seriously. So where did it all start to go wrong for Russia? On September the 21st, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization of around 300,000 Russian conscripts, the first since World War II. The presidential decree came on the tail end of a slew of devastating Ukrainian counter-offensives near the Kharkiv Oblast beginning in early September. The attacks not only liberated thousands of kilometers of Ukrainian territory, they badly mauled Russian forces who abandoned vast quantities of tanks, artillery, weapons, and ammo in retreat. The reversal ended a dismal, if not downright disastrous phase of Russian campaigning in Ukraine, one that has left morale, manpower, and motivation at an all-time low. The confirmed losses of destroyed and abandoned tanks and other armor alone, noted one commentator, exceeded the entire army of a decent-sized Central or Eastern European country, and the rate of loss doesn't look likely to be reversed anytime soon. The numbers are staggering. In just over 8 months, Russia has lost somewhere in the region of 90,000 irrecoverably wounded, lost, or killed soldiers, a number that has now eclipsed the total casualties the Soviet Union sustained during the 9 years of brutal, bloody combat in Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989. In fact, Putin notably lost more soldiers in just 1 week than the United States lost in 20 years in Afghanistan. But instead of pivoting, the Kremlin has doubled down on these failures. As Michael Kaufman, director of Russian studies at the Center for Naval Analysis, has noted, they are introducing tougher punishments for soldiers who desert or surrender, and moving forward with the illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. But it was, above all, Putin's himself and his call for mobilization that created chaos in a country that has so far been sheltered from many of the realities of the conflict. Many military-age draftees did everything in their power to avoid conscription, fleeing on trains and where that failed on bicycles, scooters, and even on foot. Satellite imagery and social media posts revealed miles-long traffic jams at Russia's borders with Georgia, Finland, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan, among others. Thousands of cars and piles of abandoned bicycles attested to the scale of dissatisfaction. In Russia itself, images of forcibly repressed protesters, some of whom were whisked into military service themselves, littered social media as Russian officials around the country went door-to-door delivering draft notices. Draconian laws in place prevent anyone from criticizing Putin's special military operation. Enlistment officers scoured the country for draft-age males. Under Russian law, men eligible for conscription must be handed a draft notice in person. As you can expect, evasion strategies underpinned the ingenuity of many Russian males, some moving to summer cabins or disappearing on indefinite camping excursions in the countryside. Others disabled their doorbell so they wouldn't hear enlistment officers. Some even injured themselves as a way to gain a medical exemption. Not everyone had the luxury of leaving the lives they'd grown accustomed to, tied to their homes by elderly parents, mortgages, or financial limitations. The unlucky were ushered into an uncertain military future. Draftees run the gamut from 17-year-old teenagers with no combat experience to avowed criminals and middle-aged men with diabetes and brain conditions. There is little regard for health, expertise, or background, even though Putin's draft specifically called for reservists with military skills. Naturally, the cannon fodder label has been applied to these new recruits, a common refrain among the men themselves. If scores of anecdotal Telegram videos are to be believed, zinc coffins are already coming. A jaded Russian military blogger complained as the mobilization unfolded. "You told us there would be training, that they would not be sent to the front line in a week. Were you lying again?" This outcome came as no surprise to Western observers. Summarizing the likely impact of mobilization, Michael Kaufman from the CNA stressed that the haphazard replacement system in place has long wreaked havoc on the Russian war effort. The Russian military has had structural manpower deficits throughout the war, leading to problems with recruitment, retention, and rotation. Units can't be rotated, leading to exhaustion. Hiring short-term volunteers exacerbated retention issues. Piecemeal solutions have led the Russian military to steadily cannibalize the force, using up officers, equipment, and enlisted professionals for reserve and volunteer units. Hence, force quality degraded over time, as did morale, retention, and exhaustion. Putin's mobilization, then, is the natural result of a problem that should really have been resolved by the start of last summer. What Russia is trying to do more than anything is slow down the rate of loss from combat attrition and short-term volunteer contracts. But what about those who don't want to join Putin's army? Today, Russian conscripts have been stripped of the right to refuse deployment, punishable at minimum by a fine of 3,000 rubles and up to a 2-year prison sentence. Volunteers who initially went to Ukraine on a short 4 to 6 month tour have now seen their service extended for the duration of the mobilization period. Those at the end of their regular conscription service are actively pressed to sign up for another contract and are in some cases told regardless of their choice they'll be mobilized later on. On November the 1st, the Russian Ministry of Defense officially announced the end of its partial mobilization. Tens of thousands of draft dodgers remain leery. "I don't trust what they say," noted one 27-year-old Russian to a reporter. The rules are simply not followed. While Putin's defense minister Sergei Shoigu affirmed that their mobilization goals had been met, the Institute for Study of War estimates that all over the country, Russia is still covertly issuing mobilization orders, and some estimate that the total number of draft dodgers could be as high as 700,000. Why is all this so alarming? The truth is that the conscription is only the first step in what ordinarily is a long, winding road to battlefield service. Draftees normally begin their military careers undergoing rigorous basic training, equipping soldiers with the fundamental tools and skills they need to navigate war in its most generalized form. If they have a unique role to play, many then go on to take a series of specialized courses. Training, however, is only one cog in the vast machine of military effectiveness. Throughput matters, meaning how a military calls up, houses, trains, feeds, equips, and deploys its forces. And as we've seen, Russian throughput has been found lacking, something that can compound to detrimental effect and ultimately portend disaster when ill-prepared soldiers reach the field of battle. Reports of Russia's ad hoc training infrastructure, top to bottom, should be truly worrying for the Kremlin. With many conscripts already fearful of their deployment before they entered basic training, what many found to greet them did little to instill confidence. In the past, Russian law stipulated that conscripts could not go into battle unless they'd had at least 4 months of training. Russia's own defense ministry website claims that an intensive 4-week combined armed training with a survival course is essential for anyone who signs a contract with the Russian army. The program takes a total of 240 hours and includes shooting, throwing grenades, and a study of military tactics. Today, these standards previously set by Russia are not being observed. Incredibly, for such a vast mobilization in such a high-stakes war, there appears to be no uniform training regimen in place at all. In fact, reports commonly surface of conscripts being sent to the front mere days after joining the army, raising red flags across the globe. A week of training is nothing for a soldier. It is a direct path to a hospital or a body bag, one independent military analyst told journalists. Another director of a Russian human rights organization said that he'd been regularly approached by parents whose children signed a military contract and ended up in Ukraine just a week later. Another conscript was quoted as saying, "After all the medical checkups, they asked me if I was ready to go to the military base the day after tomorrow." They trained us for 5 days. We waited for another 5 days for a force rotation, and then we went to combat positions. Of the informal training exercises his group conducted while waiting to deploy, he would remark, "Of course, it was not enough." The more videos conscripts uploaded onto the internet, the more dismal their situation looked. There are grave supply and housing issues, as Russian forces lose an estimated 40 armored vehicles per day in Ukraine, the equivalent of a battalion's worth of equipment. There aren't enough vehicles or munitions to cycle to the rear to train on. Pulling antiquated vehicles and equipment from storage has been one temporary solution, but much of it requires extensive maintenance. As such, reports have revealed conscripts sent to the front having barely held a machine gun or seen a real tank, let alone operate them. Asking about his shooting practice during the 11-day training period before deployment, one conscript said he had trained once, with 3 magazines total. Others practiced marching in street clothes. No machine guns, nothing. No clothes, no shoes. Half of them are hungover, old, at risk. The ambulance should be on duty. The man grimly continued. There was a soldier in our company who didn't know how a machine gun works, so I taught the guy how to disassemble and assemble a machine gun. I wouldn't want to be next to him in battle. How can you fight like that? How could anyone fight like that? There are not enough beds or heated houses to accommodate the conscripts when they arrive for training. Russian sources reveal men without sleeping bags or blankets sleeping on hard floors or in the streets, many of whom are barely fed, others sick or starving. Consequently, disorderly conduct is common. The Institute for the Study of War claimed that Russian military police had appealed for assistance to deal with more than 350 drunk and disorderly mobilized personnel who arrived at a train station in Belgorod. Some were told to bring their own uniforms purchased with their own money. Others protested when they failed to receive their promised monthly payments on time. Shoigu announced just slightly over a month into the mobilization that almost a third of the 300,000 draftees had already been deployed to the Ukraine. The numbers seem to confirm the observation that the Russian military currently prioritizes getting personnel to the frontline positions in Ukraine quickly and appears to view the quality of their training as an afterthought. This decision, prioritizing quantity over quality, may fit Russia's historical modus operandi, but could ultimately spell disaster in the Ukraine. Mark Hertling, a former US Army general and ex-commander of US Army Europe, recently called the choice a jaw-dropping sign of weakness. Hertling speaks from great experience. Between 2009 and 2011, he was responsible for all basic and advanced Army training throughout the United States. In a notable article, Hertling compared training conducted among American forces to what he himself had witnessed in Russia during several high-profile visits. Most US soldiers, Hertling stated, receive 10 weeks of basic training at a minimum. These training courses are all standardized, conducted by highly competent professional drill sergeants, benefiting from copious resources at their disposal to prepare soldiers for their specific missions. During basic training, soldiers learn infantry tactics, marksmanship, first aid, land navigation, grenade throwing, as well as all the qualities of teamwork, drill, and ceremony. Ideally, they are inculcated with discipline, professional ethics, and values that will guide them through the difficulties ahead. It is intense, Hertling adds, and often that's just the start. Follow-on training is determined by each soldier's chosen speciality, but it is measured in months, not weeks, he points out. An intelligence specialist who works as an interpreter spends almost a year learning the trade. Logistics specialists, truck drivers, fuelers, mechanics spend less, depending on their jobs, but certainly more than what he witnessed in Russia. Traditionally, around 120,000 to 140,000 Russian soldiers between the ages of 18 and 27 are selected annually to serve from a pool of 1 million men, undergoing up to 2 months of basic training capped by 3 to 6 months learning a speciality. But it wasn't just the recruits that worried him. It was also the drill sergeants he met, who showed poor leadership, with evidence later surfacing that they routinely harass and haze the recruits. He continued by saying, marksmanship training was geared towards familiarization with a weapon, but not qualification on it. Soldiers were allocated few rounds for practice on firing ranges. First aid training was rudimentary, map reading and land navigation was non-existent, soldier initiative was lacking, and discipline was lax. The barracks were crowded, bunks were close, ventilation was poor, showers and toilets were gang latrines. Food in the mess halls had small portions, no choices, and little nutritional value. I didn't observe any training on values, soldiers' ethics, professional behavior, or the teaching of land warfare, all key parts of US basic training. Most training in those areas, I was told by a Russian colonel, is conducted after soldiers leave basic and report to their units, to which I could only conclude, yeah, right. While American armored crews refine their craft in tank simulators prior to firing dozens of live rounds at different types of moving and stationary targets, Hertling was shocked when a Russian tank commander told him each of his crews was able to fire 1 live round per year. The biggest issue for the Russian military in the Ukraine, he concludes, was one of scale. The United States, with a population of 344 million, trains approximately 150,000 soldiers annually. Russia, with a population well under half of that, spread across 11 time zones, is now trying to train double that number in an incredibly short period of time, while also lacking the infrastructure and equipment to do so. So with all of these problems plaguing Russia's recruitment and training, what will be the outcome on the battlefield? Russian Battalion Tactical Groups, or BTGs, are currently estimated to be hovering around 40 to 50% of their normal strength. With huge gaps along Russia's 700-mile front line in Ukraine, they've been forced to deploy lower-quality infantry to hold the line. But no matter how many people Russia mobilizes, Michael Kaufman rightly observes that its military can only sustain and command a finite number of troops in battle. If you cannot support ill-trained recruits once they arrive at the front, they will not last long. Adding to this problem, as of November 1st, Russia has lost 1,402 experienced officers in Ukraine, an absolutely staggering number that underpins the challenges new recruits will face adapting to the rigors of battle. Ordinarily, these officers instill confidence, orient their forces to battle, and prepare them mentally for the hard fighting ahead. Now, Russia has lost so many experienced officers and soldiers that it not only lacks enough personnel to train new conscripts, it will increasingly struggle to lead them in battle. While Ukrainian NCOs have demonstrated their high quality throughout the war, no doubt influenced heavily by their close relationship and training from US Army advisors since 2014. Russia's own depleted officer corps, combined with their new recruits' anemic training and rushed deployment, may ultimately spell disaster. Yes, one could argue that history is in fact on Russia's side. They have thrown countless millions into the meat grinder of war dating back to Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812, a trend that continued strong through both world wars and survives well into the 21st century. All Russian battlefield successes, it seems, comes only when unfeeling leaders are willing to pay an incredibly steep price, expending men and materiel as cannon fodder until the enemy exhausts himself. Maybe nothing has changed. Today, images of Russian conscripts angrily holding aloft dozens of old AK-47s assigned to a sea of unarmed recruits harkens back to another familiar parallel: Stalin's grim orders for Russian soldiers to enter the battle unarmed with only a few rounds, left to wait for a comrade to get shot before receiving a rifle of their own. Russia should continue at its own peril. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments how you think Russia's rushed mobilization and training will impact the war in Ukraine as winter approaches.